The house smelled like pancakes. That warm, buttery smell that drifted up the stairs and wrapped around me, tugging me out of bed even though my body still felt like it was made of stone. I crept down the hallway, my bare feet sticking a little to the cool wood floor. The house felt quieter than usual, too still, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I paused by the front window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek through. Outside, Dad and Mr. Harlan stood near the porch, their breath puffing little clouds into the cold morning air. They were laughing about something, real, deep belly laughs that made Dad wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. Mr. Harlan looked relaxed, leaning back a little on his heels, hands stuffed into the pockets of a brown leather jacket that looked worn but comfortable. He wore dark jeans and heavy boots dusted with dirt, like he'd been up since sunrise. There was something easy about the way he stood, like he belonged out there, like he didn't have to try to look put together, he just was. For a second, it almost looked like they didn't have a care in the world. It didn't make sense. After everything that happened last night, after those eyes, after that thing outside my door, how could the world look so normal?
Your dad and Mr. Harlan have been best friends for years.
Mom said behind me, her voice floating in from the kitchen. I let the curtain fall and turned toward her. She was standing by the stove, flipping pancakes with easy, practiced movements. The kitchen was filled with the sound of batter sizzling, the soft clatter of a metal spatula against the pan, and the bubbling of a pot of syrup warming on the back burner. Light from the window over the sink caught the rising steam, making it look like the whole room was glowing. Mom moved gracefully between the counter and the stove, her robe brushing against the cabinets, her bare feet tapping lightly against the floor. She poured another circle of batter onto the pan, the sizzle kicking up again, and the smell hit me even stronger. Rich, sweet, and warm, like everything safe and good wrapped up in one breath. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled when she saw me standing there.
Morning, sweetie.
She said.
You hungry?
I nodded. She wiped her hands on the towel tucked into the waistband of her robe and walked over to me, her step soft but certain. When she reached me, she placed her warm palm gently against my cheek. Her hand smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon. She leaned in a little, searching my face, her thumb brushing just under my eye.
You didn't sleep much, did you?
She asked, her voice low, her smile dimming into something softer, sadder. I shook my head lightly. I just couldn't sleep, I said, keeping my voice small. She studied me for a second longer, like she wanted to press for more, but then she just smiled again, tired, understanding, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear.
All right, sit down. Pancakes are almost ready.
She said, her voice lifting back into something light. I obeyed, sliding into a chair at the table, the wood cold against my legs. I tried to focus on the sound of the batter sizzling, the clink of forks being set out, the rich, sweet smell filling the room. Mom glanced over her shoulder at me, her hand still working the spatula gently around the pan.
You at least rest, okay?
She asked, her voice soft, careful. She was just concerned. I shifted in my seat, wrapping my fingers around the edge of the table. I couldn't really fall asleep, I said, keeping my eyes low. She flipped a pancake, the motion smooth and practiced, and let out a little hum under her breath, the kind she made when she didn't want to push too hard.
Sometimes it's just too quiet at night.
She said, setting a clean plate in front of me.
It makes your mind wander.
I nodded, even though that wasn't it at all. She moved back to the stove, the smells of butter and syrup clinging to her robe as she worked.
You know,
She said over the soft hiss of the skillet.
when you were little, you used to crawl into our bed after bad dreams. Said you were afraid of the belly button monster.
She laughed a little, but it was a small laugh, a cheerful one. I remember, I whispered. What I didn't say was that this wasn't the same. This wasn't my imagination playing tricks. This time, the monsters weren't stuck in my head. They were here. Mom finished the last pancake and turned off the burner, wiping her hands on the towel at her waist. She looked at me for a long moment, the kitchen quiet except for the soft bubbling of the syrup warming on the back burner.
You know you can always come get me,
She said gently.
no matter how old you get, okay?
I nodded again, a lump rising in my throat. Okay, I managed. She smiled, a real smile this time, and ruffled my hair before turning to pour the syrup over my stack of pancakes. And for a minute, just a minute, it almost felt like everything was going to be fine. Mom set a fork and knife down next to my plate and brushed her hands off on the towel again. As she poured syrup over the pancakes, she glanced at me with a little smile.
I was thinking about going to the store later.
She said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world.
Pick up a few things for dinner, maybe some fresh bread.
She drizzled a little extra syrup without even asking, like she knew I needed a little extra today.
You want to come with me?
She asked, turning back to the stove to grab the syrup pot.
It'll be fun.
She added, tossing the words over her shoulder like it was a promise. I hesitated, staring down at my plate. The idea of leaving the house, even for something simple, made my stomach knot up a little, but Mom was trying, I could tell. Maybe, I said, picking up my fork and poking at the pancakes. Before she could answer, the front door creaked open. Dad's voice filled the house, light and easy.
I hope you made enough for 3.
He called out, laughing. Mom turned, one hand on her hip, just as Dad stepped into the kitchen with Mr. Harlan trailing behind him. Both of them smelled like cold air and wood smoke, and Dad still had that big, sheepish grin plastered across his face.
I might have invited Harlan over.
Dad said, walking toward the table and pulling out a chair.
I told Elias that I smelled the pancakes all the way from the porch, and he offered me to come. I hope I didn't intrude, Mrs. Granger.
Mr. Harlan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck like he wasn't sure if he should be embarrassed or proud. Mom shook her head, smiling in that way she did when Dad did something impulsive but harmless.
You're always welcome, Harlan. It's a good thing I made a big batch,
she said, already moving to grab 2 more plates from the cabinet. I sat quietly at the table, watching them, feeling the house fill up with noise and life. The clink of plates, the scrape of chairs, the low rumble of voices. And for a moment I almost believed nothing bad could happen as long as the kitchen stayed warm, and the people I loved stayed close. Almost. Mr. Harlan pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down with a satisfied sigh, stretching his arms a little before resting them on the table. He turned to me with a big grin, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and said in a cheerful voice,
Well, good morning, kiddo. How's my favorite neighbor doing today?
Before I could answer, he reached over and smothered my hair with one big rough hand, ruffling it into a messy, staticky halo around my head. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that bubbled up before I could stop it. For a second, it felt like everything was normal. Like last night had been nothing but a bad dream I was already waking up from. I tried to fix my hair, pushing it back into place as Mr. Harlan chuckled beside me, looking pleased with himself.
There's that smile.
He said, tapping his knuckles lightly against the edge of the table.
Was worried you were turning into one of those serious grown-ups already.
Dad laughed from the other side of the table, shaking out a napkin and tossing it onto his lap.
Not our Emma.
He said.
She's tougher than she looks.
Mom just smiled, setting a fresh plate of pancakes down in front of Mr. Harlan before sitting down herself, finally taking a breath like she could relax too. And for a few minutes, all I could hear was the clatter of forks against plates, the low hum of their voices, and the steady beat of the house breathing around us. Warm, familiar, safe.